Are retro games too hard? Ooh, I'd say so. You want my advice? Go for a banana or for something that's a little softer on the old set of chompers. Now, being the retro gamers that we are, sinking our teeth into a challenging game is nothing we've ever been afraid of. In fact, for a lot of us, we relish it. Naturally, and perhaps naively, I'd like to think that everybody could enjoy retro games. But if challenging games aren't your thing, then it can feel like biting off more than you can chew. So the question then becomes, are games harder than they need to be? Which instantly makes me wonder who exactly they should be trying to please. If they're already pleasing a large fan base that's dedicated themselves to them, then why should they be any different? Well, they won't be any different because they were already made. So they are what they are. And you know what they say? You can't expect somebody to change, try as they might. However, the way we interact with them can change based on what we prefer. For example, one popular choice by not. Yeah, some people will simply not play hard games. I suppose we can't blame them. I mean, games are supposed to be enjoyable. And if the difficulty is sucking the fun out of it, then why bother? Life's hard enough as it is. If I want to feel like a loser, I got plenty of ways I can already do that. Our gaming time is supposed to be an oasis, not a torture chamber. Say you've had a long day of work and you're looking to take a load off. I can understand somebody in that situation not immediately thinking, you know what would hit the spot right now? Those respawning enemies in stage 6-2 of Ninja Gaiden. Now that's relaxing. Well, but what if for some games you just need to get over a hurdle of some kind, preferably just a small one, and then perhaps from there on, it's all gravy. This is where it gets tricky because playing and enjoying difficult games requires the right mindset. One of the more obvious mindsets that will not work is to come in expecting it to be easy. But what kind of idiot would do that, you might be thinking? You wouldn't eat celery expecting it to be a cookie. Well, the thing is that sometimes people don't know what they're getting into with some games. Heck, maybe they're just not used to games providing that much resistance. I can't tell you how many times I heard about somebody taking home their NES Mini, all excited, then fired that sucker up only to get dominated by it. These old consoles aren't horsing around and you gotta watch out or they'll get ya. When you're about to tackle a challenging game, you gotta be prepared. And when it comes to retro games, there's a few basic assumptions you probably want to go in with. Assumption number 1, the game is not afraid to set you back. If you lose a life, these games won't just start you right back where you were. You're either going back to the very beginning of that stage or perhaps a checkpoint. And yes, if you fail enough, you're going all the way back to the very beginning of the game. Makes sense to me. I mean, if the results of not doing well in a game isn't much different than doing well in the game, then what's the point of doing well? Check out my face here that just didn't get slapped because I've been good. How would it be fair if a more slappable face got the same treatment? Although, I suppose you could just say no faces deserve to be slapped, and progressing through a game is enjoyable regardless of how challenging it was. I can understand that. Moving on to assumption number 2. You can't just charge ahead recklessly. That's a real quick way to get put in your place. You gotta actually have some timing and rhythm. Goodness forbid, to progress through the game, you need to actually get good at the game, as people love to say. Shouldn't come as a shock, and yet for some people it does. My guess is that people have become so accustomed to more modern games that really want to make sure you reach the end of them. Respawn you right where you just were, offer to lower the difficulty, or heck, just make huge sections of the game parts you don't even have to do anything to progress. Yeah, not to brag, but I'm really good at playing through cutscenes, never died once. Meanwhile, retro games don't give a rat's hiney if you reach the end of them. You think the creators are going to be crying because somebody didn't see how much work they put into an end screen like this? Yeah, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey, and that journey is going to suck unless you enjoy the process of making progress. When people ask why somebody would want to subject themselves to something they don't have to that offers resistance, I immediately think of something like a crossword puzzle, Rubik's Cube, Sudoku, or what have you. We like to solve things. It's enjoyable. A difficult video game is really not much different. Beating a retro video game isn't just about having ninja-like reflexes, it's more so about using your brain to navigate through the stage in a thoughtful, well-timed, and often clever way. Problem is, you may not know that a thoughtful solution to progress exists if you never get that far. Maybe you just pick up the controller, try to charge ahead a few times, get your butt whooped, say the game is either stupid and or cheap, and then you're done with it. I think that's a huge factor. Difficulty is one thing, but being cheap is different. If a game is going to be difficult, it should still be fair. Problem is, what's fair is subjective, and I swear that some people think any kind of obstacle is unfair just by default. I've seen some people playing retro games who will just run straight into the first enemy and act like it's ridiculous they got hurt. There's a door I gotta open to get into this room? What a cheap doorway. Even if it's not cheap, not every gamer wants their games to be difficult, nor should they. Games should be able to serve the player and enjoyable experience. So if that means an easier game, then good for them. Also, personal preferences aside, judging what kind of games somebody else wants to play doesn't make a lot of sense and isn't very helpful. I wouldn't tell you what kind of fruit you should eat, and believe me, I'd have a choice in mind if I did. What's also not helpful is telling people who are having a hard time with a game, it's not that hard. Well, it's not hard for you, great. Just because something is easy for us doesn't mean it's easy for others. Who's been playing Contra once a month for the last 2 decades? Oh, you mean not everybody? Imagine if you were on a plane, the captain gets on the intercom, and instead of saying what the temperature's gonna be wherever you're landing, just said everyone on board was an idiot for not being able to fly the plane themselves. I think it's also important to point out that games being hard or easy isn't necessarily dependent on whether or not it's a more modern or retro game either. Sure, retro games have a reputation for being hard, but there are still easier retro games to be found, much like there are hard modern games too, especially when you consider the influence of the Dark Souls games and indie scene, which, fittingly enough, are heavily influenced by older games. I caught my copy of Dark Souls asking Ghouls and Ghosts for an autograph once. I think the big thing it all comes down to is choice. That way everybody can be happy, and not just choice in terms of which games you play, but how you play them. Perhaps one of the biggest ways to make retro games easier is with save states, something that has become more well known in recent years with the popularity of devices like the mini consoles, but in actuality have been around for a long time. Not a fan of checkpoints, or a lack of checkpoints I should say? Well, with save states you can make your own checkpoints, allowing you to go back to a spot wherever and whenever you want. Heck, you could save after every single enemy you defeat if you wanted to. You know, it's too bad life doesn't have save states, am I right? I mean, just think of the possibilities. I know how I'd use mine. Now, some will say that using save states in games is cheating, while others will say, who cares? I tend to side with those folks. These are video games, not a high school exam. The argument against using save states that I'm more prone to agreeing with is that it's not how the game was designed to be played, which, if you're okay with playing a game under those circumstances, then yep, I'd say we're right back to who cares territory. But if you want to play a game how it was originally designed, then that's great too. Alright, but before I sound too much like I'm taking a very neutral, do whatever works best for you approach, which, come on, isn't that pretty much always the right answer for these kinds of things? Let me give my personal answer to the question. No, retro games aren't too hard. So many fans have come to love the challenge that goes hand in hand with these games that an entire community has been built around it, and a community that seems to only be getting more and more passionate. The games aren't too hard, you just need to adjust your expectations and approach to them when you do play them. Heck, some retro games are actually criticized for being too easy that would probably give some people a pretty good challenge. Alright, but with all of that for this video's question, I don't necessarily want to just ask a bunch of retro gamers, do you think retro games are too hard? Because obviously most of us don't. might as well just ask if you think retro games are bad. But you'd be surprised because probably at least some of you think retro games are too hard. Either way, my main question is to ask why you like your games to be hard. Or, maybe some of them are easy for you at this point. So with that, leave your answers along with anything else you'd like to say down below, and I will see ya in the next video.
He's the retro bird, yeah, and he's talking about video games. He's